All right, what is going on, everyone? Thank you for tuning into this video here. So since the big camera is still currently out of commission, I'm filming on this GoPro here, and since it has such a wide angle lens, I thought this video would be perfect for my circumstances right now. So today's video is a very important one. I would like to do it on a big camera, but I think with the GoPro it's actually going to be just about perfect. So we're going to be talking about the three things that make each rod special. That is going to be power, action, and taper. Now, three of these things make up every single rod and kind of almost separate each rod into its own category that you can use for different things. Before we hop into that though, guys, if you're new and you enjoy the content you're seeing here on the channel, subscribe. We really appreciate it. We're gonna be doing another big giveaway at 2,000 subscribers, and we really love to see all the support on the channel here. If you see anything you like in this video, I'm gonna be talking about mainly bait casters here, but we might get into some spinning as well. You can find all of them at lakeprotackle.com. Of course, you can also find tons of rods, reels, and all other tackle. So let's go ahead and hop into the video here. We're gonna start off with power. Now, power is what is the driving factor into choosing a lot of the baits that you want to throw. So I'm not going to be throwing a topwater frog on a medium rod. I'm going to be choosing a heavy rod, and that power is what generates most of my decision making. So starting off, we have this rod right here. This is a Miller Rods Square Freak. This is made for square bills, jerk baits, other crankbaits and stuff like that. And also we'll get into some of the nitpicky stuff, kind of like length and how that corresponds with the power and all that. So let's just go ahead and start with power. Now, power, like I said, it's going to be what allows you to throw lures. It's gonna give you mainly your line rating and also your lure rating on what you can throw when it comes to that. So this Square Freak here, it's a 6'8" rod. It is a medium power, so that means it doesn't take a lot of strength for me to bend this blank here. Now, each blank bends a little differently, and that is going to be taper and action. We're gonna get into that here in a little bit. So power here, it doesn't take a lot of power to get this rod blank flexing, right? Let's move up a step. We're gonna move up to this rod right here. Now, this rod is going to be a brand new rod to the store. Actually, I did a video on it just last week, I believe. This is a Halo Rods. Let me see, I forget the name of this one. This is the Rave 3. It's a medium heavy rod. And you can see here, it's gonna take a little, well, I guess you can see it, but you can't feel it. I can feel it, putting a little bit more pressure on it. Generally, when you get into the heavier the rod, the bigger the blank is gonna be. And that's one way to easily compare your rods in terms of the power. You can see here, this Miller rod is much skinnier than the Halo rod. So not all the time does that really work out. Some rods are composite rods that have real big, thick blanks, but they have a very real medium to medium heavy power on them. So here it takes a little bit more to get that rod going. So this is going to be a medium heavy power. Next up is going to be a heavy power, and you know, heavy powers I'm going to be using for something like frogs most of the time, usually thicker gauge hooks that I have to drive the hook into, or if I'm fishing at long distances and I want to make sure that rod doesn't flex too much and I get a good hook set. So this X Pride 7'2" rod is a heavy rod and heavy power, and you can see here it takes a lot to get going. And like I said, great for frogging, great for flipping. Generally, with a heavy rod, I like to throw braided line or at least 17 to 20 pound fluorocarbon, just because this rod is so strong. I'm putting a lot of force on that lure, putting a lot of force through the line and into that fish's mouth. So these three rods here represent three different powers: medium, medium heavy, and heavy. And of course you have rods that kind of go between these on the other sides, like your BFS on the ultralight side, and you have like swim bait rods after this typical normal heavy setup. So there's always subsets of stuff you can get in, but we're gonna stick with the main ones here. I think that a lot of people confuse the power, the action, and the taper of a rod. So let's go ahead and talk about action a little bit. So the action of the rod is what I compare to how springy it is, if that makes any sense. So this rod here, this is going to be a very moderate action rod, and you can tell action by doing the simple test. If you take, hold the rod down near the handle just so you can reach the tip area, but I want you to take the tip of your rods to help you determine the action of it. And all you have to do, spin it down a little bit and let it go. And the slower the vibration and the slower it takes, the longer it takes for the tip to return back to where it normally goes, the more moderate the rod. So this here is a very, very moderate rod. It's a cranking rod, so it makes sense that it has a very moderate action. It's almost slow to go back to where it wants to go to. In contrast, in very stark contrast, I have a Megabass rod. This is the FMJ by Megabass. It's a P5 Destroyer. Stark contrast here. This rod is a fast rod, an extremely fast rod. So I'm gonna do the same test. I'm not gonna bend it too much, but you can see right there, it's going back very, very quickly. And there's even faster ones than this. This is actually, I would probably say, a fast to moderate fast action here. Typically what happens with heavier rods is that they have faster and faster actions, just because the blank all the way through is thicker, it's stronger, and it wants to return back to where it wants to go a lot quicker. So you can see there on that X Pride, it's returning back pretty quickly to where it wants to go. So it's going to be a normal fast action. Now, what confuses people is when you get cranking rods, right? So this is a composite rod by Evergreen. We only have one of these. There's only 600 and I believe 40 or 690 of these ever made. And I'm gonna be doing a little test here with it. So this is a glass composite rod, a little bit different from your normal graphite, but same principles apply, your same tests. It does take a little bit to get that blank going. It's almost a medium heavy. They label it a heavy power, but this rod here has a ton of action in it because it's a glass composite rod. So it's going to take a lot longer for that tip to return to normal, and it has a lot of force behind it when you let it go. So this rod here is classified as a heavy, moderate action, just because it is glass again. And that is really how to determine the action of your rod. Now, where do each and every actions fit in your arsenal? Typically, like I said, again, with slower actions or moderate actions, you're gonna be fishing crankbaits on them. You know, cranking rods tend to have a more moderate action. Moderate fast action is great for reaction baits, such as chatterbaits and spinner baits and swim baits, smaller swim baits, not real big ones. But you know, moving baits and stuff, you want that moderate action because as that fish opens up its mouth, it creates a vacuum and sucks your bait in. So when you feel the bite, bites, typically your bites are gonna be more amplified on a moderate rod, especially with moving baits, because that fish is opening up its mouth, it's sucking the lure back in, and your rod is gonna load up. So as that bait's going, your rod tip's gonna be vibrating a little bit, and as soon as that fish eats it, it's gonna suck that bait forward towards its mouth, and your rod's gonna bounce, and then it's gonna go like that, and it's gonna load, you're gonna feel it, and in that split second, you set the hook, and you get that hook in the fish's mouth. So that's why it's important to have moderate actions on your cranking rods, your moving bait rods and stuff like that. But when it comes to fast actions, if you're up close and personal, like you're flipping or something, flipping hydrilla mats, or you're flipping like laydowns or something, the 7'2" heavy X Pride is great for instant feedback. You know, you're not flipping too far most of the time, and with a single hook Texas rig bait or flipping bait, when you flip out there, you want to make sure you have straight contact with your bait out there. So when you flip out there, that fish eats it, it's gonna go dong, you're gonna feel it, and you immediately set the hook. Most of the time you immediately set the hook and you get that hook in the fish's mouth. If you wait too long, a lot of the times they get it in their mouth, they feel it, they're like, oh, it doesn't taste good, and spit it out. And by then you're too slow, you don't have enough time to get that hook in the fish's mouth. So that's kind of where the action plays into it. Now let's kind of talk about taper. So taper is one that I think a lot of people don't pay attention to. Taper and action, I believe, get mixed a lot. So taper is a lot different. I think taper is a totally different subset of rods that a lot of people don't talk about. So let's talk about it here. So taper is what I believe to be the two main portions of a rod, the tip section and the back section. So basically just split your rod in half. The taper of the rod, this rod here, does not have a lot of taper on it. This is going to be a rod that has a full, pretty good parabolic bend on it. However, you do have a little bit of a tip section, and taper is what I really refer to as what does the tip do and what does the backbone do. So this taper here, I don't really have names for each of them, but it's kind of things I note on a rod. So this FMJ by Megabass, it's going to be a fast rod. It's going to be a medium heavy power rod, but it has a pretty good up front tip action on it, so it does load really well, and then it stiffens up extremely quick in the back here. So the tip action on it is going to be, I guess, really nice and light, so you're able to feel those bites. Again, it's more amplified and more moderate actions at the top there. Let's take this rod right here. So the X Pride, back to the X Pride, guys. Heavy rod. This one has almost no taper to it. So the tip to the back portion of the rod is all pretty much the same. It does strengthen up pretty good in the very back, but this whole section from the second eyelet to the tip, all about the same. There's no extra taper anywhere. All right, and lastly, let's talk about the Miller rod skin, the Square Freak. This rod here has tons of taper on it. You can see this tip folds almost all the way back around and then keeps going into the blank. So this also, again, goes into power, ties into the action of the rod. It's a cranking rod, so it does have a very soft tip, so you make sure you get those fish. So the taper of the rod is a very, I guess you could call it moderate, where the tip is very wimpy and loads really well. And then you get into your ladder backbone in the very back of the rod. So when it comes to taper, I do like to focus a little more on spinning rods than bait casters, but bait casters definitely have a lot of specific tapers to them as well. So let's take a look at some spinning rods here that have some very interesting tapers on them. All right, so first up is the USA P5 Destroyer Addermine. Now this rod here is a 6'11" rod. It is a, I guess technically you'd call it a, what is this, F 3.5 rod. So in Megabass terms, 3.5 is basically a medium. And that's what it is. It's got a medium power to it, and it has a very, I guess, moderate fast action. So it's not super slow. It does have a good recoil to it when it goes back to its original form here. But let's talk about the taper of the rod. So the taper on this Addermine here is very standard throughout the entire rod. You can see the bend curve in the rod is just about the same almost all the way through the rod. It does go pretty far back, which is really nice. So when you are using like a wacky rig or something like that, I mean, you can really set the hook into them with this rod. It's gonna tape, the taper goes all the way through, and that has a lot to do with the medium power of the rod. So let me go get another rod here. This is going to be a Megabass Tatula Elite rod. It's gonna be the hair jig rod, but check this out. All right, so this one right here is a 7'6" hair jig rod, and this one is super awesome. So the taper on this rod is actually gonna go all the way, almost all the way back into the rod, even into the back section. You can see it still bending, and of course the tip section is extremely light. So this is a medium light power rod. It has a very moderate action on it. Has a lot of a big frequency in the tip on how it moves, and the taper is very extreme. Now let's take another look at another rod that has almost no taper to it and has a extremely fast action. All right, so this rod right here is a Abu Garcia Veritas 7-foot fast medium. So it's a medium rod. I would almost dare to call it a medium heavy just because it is a little bit more powerful, but they say it's a fast action, which I guess I could agree with. I would call it a little more moderate. I think since they're comparing it to something like a bait caster, this would be moderate. I would call this almost a moderate fast or even a faster action. But you can see the taper. Let's take a look at this taper here. So you get a little bit in the tip. So it does have a good amount of bend in the tip, and then instantly it, you know, strengthens back up here. So this is one where if you're going to throw something like a reaction bait or something like that, where you do want backbone immediately right off the tip, you're gonna feel a bite and you're gonna set the hook. Something like shaky heads would be amazing on this rod. I mean, even bigger Ned rigs would be very, very good. Now you can still throw almost all techniques on this. I'm not saying that you can only throw certain techniques on certain actions and tapers and all that, because by then you'd have hundreds and hundreds of rods for each technique. All I'm saying is that each different power, each different action and taper contributes to you landing certain fish with certain lures certain times of the year. So sometimes when it's a colder time of the year, like winter time, you want a little bit heavier rod. You might want a little bit more backbone in your rod to get the hook into the fish's mouth if you're fishing something like a jig or a Texas rig or something like that. When it comes to spinning stuff, guys, a lot of spinning stuff, a lot of people lose a lot of fish on spinning setups because they're using too light of a rod. It might be that the action of the rod is just too slow for what they need it to be. So typically, again, slower actions, guys, I use treble hooks for. Faster the action on the rod, I'm going to be using more basically like bottom contact baits or even reaction baits. You know, power, it's all dependent on what you like. For me, I throw my frogs on a medium heavy, but that's because my medium heavy rods that I use have a very, very fast action on them, and they also have a very good taper. So I only have a little tip section, and then it goes pretty like full medium heavy all the way down the rod. So it really just depends on your style of fishing, and I hope this video helped you kind of determine, maybe think about more which rods you might need for certain techniques. And that was the goal of this video here. So if you enjoyed it, I really appreciate a share. Put it on your channel, Instagram, Facebook, somewhere, and you go follow us on Instagram and Facebook. I'm very, very up to date with everything that goes on. So if you shoot me a DM or something, I'll respond probably within like 5 or 10 minutes. And of course, comments here on YouTube, I am pretty good about answering them pretty quickly. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you like any of the stuff that you see here in the video, find it all lakeprotackle.com, guys. We've got some big stuff coming. If you haven't seen the Armstrong Outfitters limited edition spooks, go check that out up in the corner over here, and you can find all that. Those spooks were done, or it was a color came out of my head, and Armstrong Outfitters was able to get it done for us. So only 36 were available. I think we've only got a few left, so go check them out, lakeprotackle.com, guys. Thank you so much for watching again. Peace out.